Shalom Aleichem and welcome to Mochin Leira Online Smicha. One of the most common kinyonim, acts of acquisition that is done in transaction, and especially in the chasna, you see it by a chasna, you find it also by selling the chametz, is the transaction that's called Xalipin or Kinyan Sudar. What is the Kinyan Sudar? When you want a transaction to be considered final, complete, and no way to back out of the deal, we do something symbolic, and we'll soon talk about how it's done. And that symbolic act makes the sale complete and final, and nobody could change their mind. Now, there are different kinyonim. We know there's chazaka, there's shtar, there's kesef, but the most common one, so common that whenever Chazal use the term kinyan and they don't specify what type of kinyan it is, it's usually kinyan sudar. Kinyan sudar means the kinyan done with the handkerchief. What is the process of this kinyan sudar, and where is the source for this kinyan sudar? Let's do a quick rundown. In the story of Boaz and Rus, in the Rus, there's a pasuk that when Boaz wanted to acquire the rights, certain rights of real estate, and be able to move on to marry Rus, so it says over there, "V'zois lifnim b'Yisrael ala geula v'ala tmura l'kayim kol davar," and this is the process of how things are done amongst Jewish transaction. And then again, in the Mefarshim, it details what is ala geula, what is ala tmura, and what is l'kayim kol davar, to make each deal final. But the pasuk goes on to say, "Shalaf ish na'aloi," a person takes off his shoe, v'nosam l're'eyu. Now he gives that shoe to his friend. There's a buyer and there's a seller. There's a meshabed and mishtabed, and by exchanging a shoe, that's the literal translation from this from one person to another person, the sale becomes final. So that's where it's based on. It's interesting to note that the Mefarshim say that the whole kinyan of Xalipin, even though it became the most standard kinyan, is not mentioned anywhere in the Mishnah. The first place we find how it's mentioned in details is in Yerushalmi. Now, based the fact that it's discussed in Rus, so there's a machlokes harishonim. The machlokes harishonim is this a kinyan which is a kinyan min Torah, a way of acquiring something good enough min Torah, or since it's only mentioned in the Rus, it's divrei Kabbalah. Maybe for items that you need to have a kinyan min Torah, it's not strong enough. Kesef, shtar, those type of forms of kinyanim are mentioned clearly in the Torah. La halacha, we accept that a Xalipin, this type of kinyan sudar, is good enough, because divrei Kabbalah has at least for this type of item, is as strong as divrei Torah, and any item that needs a kinyan min Torah, this form of kinyan Xalipin, kinyan sudar, is good enough. We mentioned that the pasuk says shalaf ish na'aloi, that a person took off a shoe and gave the other person his shoe. Who took off the shoe, and who was it given to? This is a big machlokes in the Gemara Bava Metzia, Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. When you're doing the symbolic kinyan, whose item must it be? Must it be the buyer's item or the seller's item? Is it kelev shel koine or kelev shel makna? The moicher or the lekeach? And this is a big machlokes, with whose item do you do the Maisa HaKinyan. And this, because it is such a big machlokes, it is actually brought down that the Go'ayim made a takana that we don't know who we should pass like la halacha. So actually we take a third party's item. It's the Eidim who are witnessing it, who are seeing this, it's common practice. They are koina from the makna with their own sudar. And the Go'ayim write that there was a takana sayeshivas that the shliach bezdin or the eidim come with their item, and to avoid this machlekes, if it's the item that belongs to the koina or the makna, then you run into what's if it was given to him as a present, what's if it's a matanas lahachzer, what's if it was a loan. So just avoid that all. You just do it from a third party's item, and with that item we do the kinyan of kinyan sudar, especially because a lot of times this kinyan is not even done in front of both parties, since the kinyan could even be done shaloi b'fnei hakoina. I could allow my thing to be given or sold or to given away, even if the one acquiring is not here. So therefore, to make the kinyan be accessible, for in all situations, we just use the third party's item, either the shliach bezdin or the edim. Once we talk about edim, that opens a whole other conversation, and that is, we know that when you make a kinyan b'chlal, like a kinyan kesef, you don't need to have edim in attendance when you're paying the value of what you're buying. You pay for it, you get it done. When you do a kinyan meshicha or any other kinyan, most of the other kinyanim, you don't need edim in attendance. So the question is, do you need edim in attendance to watch the kinyan sudar, the picking up of the handkerchief? Now, this is a machlekes haga'onim. There's a machlekes rishonim. There's a three-way machlekes. One opinion holds, the Iter holds, and Tosfos and Kedushin Daf Chavav and Beis holds that you need that for kinyan of sudar, kinyan Chalipin is only a kinyan if it's done b'fnei edim. Other opinion says that you don't need two edim; it's enough to have one eid. And a third opinion is you don't even. It's why is it any different than any other kinyan? Just like any other kinyan could be done privately between the buyer and the seller, or whatever, the one being mishtabed, you don't need any edim. Lahalacha, the place can write, this is brought in Shulchan Aruch and Choshen Mishpah Siman Kuf Tzadik Hey. Lahalacha, the place can write that even if there's no edim, if the kinyan chalipin were done, you can't retract, you can't change your mind, you're committed to do what you want. And because we don't necessarily really need edim, since you don't really need edim, if there were edim that they weren't kosher, they were psuli edis, it doesn't break the kinyan, because you don't really need edim. And why? Because the whole the kinyan is no different than any other kinyan. However, it's the derech ha'olam to be meyached edim, because to prevent preventive medicine, that there shouldn't be a fight later on. Maybe somebody's going to deny whether or not it was a kinyan. So the derech ha'olam is to be meyached edim, and because the derech ha'olam is to be meyached edim, so therefore it says in Svarim, it says in Halacha, that by night you don't do kinyan sudar. You do it only in a place where there's light, strong light, so the edim should be able to see who the buyer is, who the seller is. So to be able to be clear, there are those that say that in any case you shouldn't do in Shilas Teshuvas Masas Binyamin Siman Ayin Hey. He says it has nothing to do to light. You don't do kinyan sudar at night at all. Now, this is what you do. I'm saying the symbolic way of using a sudar, a handkerchief, or something like that. And when you use that item and you pick it up, that's a symbolic form of showing the transaction is final. What has to be picked up? We keep on using the word na'aloi, the shoe, and we only discussed whose shoe it was. Was it a koina or the makna? Well, what's if it's not a shoe? What else could be used? So the din is, from this pasuk we learn that you could only use a keli, similar to shalaf ish na'aloi. Anything which is like a na'al, you're allowed to use, not necessarily, and it doesn't even have to be worth a shavar pruta, even though usually most of the other things we need a davar chashuv. This is an exception. You don't need a davar. You don't need a shavar pruta as long as it is a keli. Now, when you talk about a keli, the shear of a keli is important, because a shear of a keli has to be gimel al gimel. Usually, we say that the kinyan chalipin is usually done by kinyan sudar with a handkerchief. As long as it's shalish etzbois al shalish etzbois, then it's, even though it might not be the most expensive thing and it's a small handkerchief, it's still good enough. Under that shear, you cannot make a kinyan chalipin, because under that shear, it's not bechlal beged, and if it's not in many halachas and tuma, it's not bechlal beged, and by chalipin you need a keli, and under that shear, it's not a beged, it's not a davar choshev at all. So therefore, you have to give it over to the other person to acquire it. Now he gives it back, or he can keep it. It's no big deal, no big difference there. But so you have to give him the question is, does he have to hold the whole item, or does he hold on to a part of the item? Is it good enough? That too is a discussion, because as long as in his hands he's holding the item big enough, which will consider it a keli shalish, the acquisition is final. This is a very interesting concept about chalipin, especially by marriage, because all the times you see by the chasna, by the tnoyim or whatever, by the ksuba, that people commit themselves to certain obligations by picking up a handkerchief or anything like that. That's very interesting. That's a form of a kinyan. Yet the actual marriage, the actual commitment of the marriage, the kiddushin between a husband and wife, that's not allowed to be done by chalipin. The commitment of the financial obligations become final once you do the chalipin. But if a man is mekadesh a woman, and instead of giving her a ring, he does the kinyan chalipin, even though kesef works and all that, chalipin does not work for kiddushin, because as mentioned before, since chalipin could be done even b'pachas mishavar pruta, a woman will never get engaged for such a small amount of valuable thing. You need the minimum of at least a shavar pruta.